YCS Atlanta marks probably the end of the format as we fast approach the next ban list, but also probably the end of the first quarter of the year. Yes, we are already 25% of the way through 2019, so this is roughly when, I guess, stocks and games and stuff like that start announcing their quarterly earnings and all that kind of stuff. And I thought it would be a good time to reflect upon the state of Yu-Gi-Oh! And think about just what the game is like at the moment. So what am I going to be doing in this video? Well, memes and stuff aside, I do want to take a very serious deep dive discussion and just reflect upon how far the game has come this year, where we've come from 2018 as a context, and just what are some of the issues and also positives in the game right now. The main two topics, of course, the biggest one is going to be gameplay. I'll be focusing a lot on probably not so much format, but just the kind of direction the game is taking and how the sort of cards and the deck choices over the last 3 months have panned out and what it really means for players. And the second section will be more organizational stuff, talking about events and reprints and card prices and all that kind of stuff. So across my social media, I asked the question to the community and hundreds of you guys replied. And I basically asked, how do you feel about the state of the game at the moment? And it seems like overall, the majority of you are very happy with where we stand with Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that even very negative opinions towards the game right now are far in between like the minority. I'm going to be pretty much not giving any of my opinion for the rest of this video. A lot of what I'm going to be saying here is going to be discussions that I've had with top players over the last few hours actually. And a couple of days as well with some people talking about the state of the game and certain card choices and how they feel about certain things. And I'm going to be trying to present multiple angles and perspectives. So this isn't really much of an opinion piece if that's what you're looking for, but I think it's very good in that you will be getting different angles and perspectives, and I'll try and be as unbiased as I can, although obviously I do have my own opinions, and hopefully by the end of it you probably won't know how I feel about any of this, but I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of important things to go over that a lot of people can agree on. Let's begin with the first section here and talk about the gameplay, I suppose. For the context, I think we should come away from is 2018 and the end of it, I suppose. The year that was known as the FTK. So while many people responded in the polls saying that this was a very positive and great format that we're having just now, and the game itself is just super enjoyable at this point in time, I think it's one thing to say the game is enjoyable at the moment, but at the same time maybe question ourselves and think, are you really enjoying the game right now? Or is it just because 2018 was so awful for gameplay that anything above and beyond that just seems like a complete godsend? What if this format actually isn't even that good? It's just because last year was so terrible that we've managed to enjoy this one a little bit more. And again, I'm not saying that this format is bad or anything, just hypothesizing that perhaps that could be a certain angle to look at this. For the most of this quarter, we've had pretty much 3 main decks, and that will probably be Sky Striker, most recently Salamangreat, and of course the combo variants, which I think probably should cover mostly Thunder Dragons, but there's been, Slash Danger in there as well. So overall, 3 very unique and varied decks in their playstyle. Their approaches are very different. They mechanically function very differently from each other. And you're able to kind of pick a deck there and see, which one do I really enjoy? And you do have that option. You also have the option in budget because you don't necessarily feel like spending 1,500 on a full Thunder Dragon Danger deck is quite within your budget right now to dedicate to just a hobby that could get banned at any point in time or whatever. That's understandable, but you do have other options there. I think it's a very positive thing that these decks are very, very interactive with one another. Thunder Dragon obviously a little bit less, but I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more in depth in just a moment. But starting off with the first main two, I suppose, Sky Striker and Salamangreat, you do have a lot of interaction between these two decks. Games can last multiple turns, which I guess in a card game more than one turn is ideal, but in recent years that's not always been the case. Sky Striker mirror matches, Sky Striker versus Salamangreat is always going to be a pretty interesting matchup regardless of what goes on. Obviously you are going to like open insane sometimes and engage your opponent out of any sort of response that they can have if you just resolve that card far too many times in a turn. That's understandable. It is a card game after all, but for the most part, as we can see from some of the streams and stuff, the better player was generally winning their games. And that's really what you want to see from a card game, right? You want to see the best player do well because they're just better than their opponent. That's how you want to win your matches. You want to win your match because you're better. I think it's one thing to be biased because you're doing well or you have a bit of a hot streak right now, but it's important to ask, how am I winning my matches? Is the way I'm winning my matches fun? And at the same time, if I'm losing all of my matches, am I at least like losing my matches because of reasons within my control? Or am I being just completely shut out and locked from the game with cards like Artifact Scythe and stuff like that, which I'll be going into in just a moment. But I think overall, generally, it seems like this format's been pretty positive because of the interactivity between like these two heavyweight meta contending decks at the moment. And Thunder Dragon is a bit of its own beast right now, but just talking about combo for a second, you do have a lot of options. We have seen decks at even like Zombie Danger top, we've seen multiple Orcus variants, Dark Warrior, Danger variants of all kinds of breeds and shapes and sizes, and of course even Pendulum has had some recent success at the Premier event level. You have a lot of options in way of combo decks, and that's good to see, because even if you aren't willing to dish out hundreds and hundreds for a Danger package, which is a little bit absurd, but like I said, we'll be talking about card prices and stuff later in the video. It's good to see that there's quite a variety of combo decks. Obviously, not one of these decks is like the best deck of their respective category, like maybe Thunder Dragon can be classified as. But the most important thing when talking about the state of the game is to understand that there is options outside of just the de facto single combo deck that many people in the community may perceive to be as the only combo deck, that being Thunder Dragon. You do have other options there. And talking about control decks, well, you do have Sky Striker and Salamangreat, which are basically control decks, but a little bit lacking in options right now. Altergeist, I think it's sad that Altergeist doesn't have any tops at all this year to really kind of cement it as a sort of a contending control deck. I think it has a couple of tops actually, because the Sydney was technically in January. We also have Guru Control, which does have a couple of tops here and there. So not as many wide varied options as you do for combo decks, but there is still that chance that you have to do well with something like Guru or maybe even Altergeist. Like, you can do fairly well at an event, and I think for the vast majority of the player base, that's a cool option to see. These decks aren't exactly awful for the game. Yeah, sometimes floodgates can be included, but you know, for the most part, it's not completely unfair, horrible game-breaking things, unlike Imperial Order, which again, we'll probably move on to the more negative stuff just a second. So good interactivity we have across the board. Even Thunder Dragon versus Salamangreat can be actually very interactive and a pretty good matchup overall, and it's something that's fairly enjoyable to see, and we did watch that across the stream this weekend, and I think it wasn't too bad. It was only really kind of horrible to watch was like the mirror matches between Thunder Dragons or Sky Striker versus Thunder Dragons, which I think in a card game it's natural. Like, when you have a fairly diverse format, some decks are just going to have straight up be stronger than a certain other deck. That's just natural. Don't want to say it's maybe quite rock, paper, scissors, but however, it's good to see that at least there is some kind of diversity there. And even in the tough matchups like Striker versus Thunder Dragon, in extreme cases, it can be pretty bad, but clearly it's not so bad to the point that Sky Striker is completely shut off from the meta. As we've seen, it won the whole event, and it took quite a number of top cut spots. In fact, it took the most number of top cut spots in the most recent YCS, so clearly it's not that bad. Talking a little bit more about Thunder Dragon now, I think it's quite a common discussion point to talk about my break my board strategy and all these kind of things that have been happening in recent years that a lot of the player base isn't too happy with. But I think for the most part, a good point and a little thing that it took me way too long to realize until honestly quite recently was that it's Yu-Gi-Oh! And break my board has been very much a large portion of playing this game for many, many years now, ever since maybe I want to say like perhaps even as far back you could look as 2008, we've had very sort of combo-based decks that make a big sort of crazy play turn one, and then you don't really have much of a follow-up after that if your board gets broken, or if your opponent just doesn't have a response, you just kind of win on turn three. Like, that's always been a part of the game, and I think that if you are really, really against these big combo decks, making these crazy boards, to tell you the truth, I really don't think this game is for you, and it's something that I've realized recently. You should either just accept that that's how the game is played right now. There will always generally be a combo deck in the format that makes a big board with multiple negates that aims to like just basically kill you on turn 3 and stun you totally with their negates and disruptions on turn 2. You should probably just accept like that's how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is right now. Now, at the same time, I don't want to defend this strategy too much because there is a bit of give and take. I think that break my board is fine and acceptable for Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're putting up a couple of disruptions here and there and maybe some protection backed maybe by a hand trap. Like, that sounds like a lot, but you know, decks like Salamangreat and Sky Striker are very good at playing through multiple disruptions, as we've seen throughout this whole format. I don't think it's too bad, but I think that it does go way too far in some cases. Like we saw last year, there are extremes in any sort of facet of gameplay, and that's going to be like, for example, the Goki stuff we saw, where you can play through hand traps with the deck, loop your opponent for multiple cards with Gumblar, extra link your opponent, so you're basically setting Vanity's Emptiness that can't be outed, and you can negate a card in the process that your opponent may top deck into with their 2 remaining cards or whatever. That, I think, is obviously too far in one direction of break my board. You see there's like set pass, and then there's all the way on the opposite side of that spectrum, which is like pretty much an FTK, and I think for the most part everyone can agree that Goki at its height in 2018 was just a far too gone break my board style of deck. And I think where we're at right now is honestly not too bad. I think Thunder Dragon needs a little bit of toning down, because ripping 2 cards out of your hand with Levianeer and then setting up multiple negates is a little bit too much, and I'm sure the next ban list will address this, but I think it goes without discussion, really, and it proves like the fact that, you know, because Thunder Dragon hasn't won a YCS and hasn't consistently had most of the top cut spots in any event since its release, it can't be that busted, right? But that's not to say that there aren't problems with this. And that's probably going to be taking me on to my next point now, talking about a little bit about the negatives here. For the most part, just to summarize my first points about gameplay, I think, you know, we have a lot of diversity. There's multiple combo decks that you can play. There's a good options that you have in control decks. The decks that you can play currently, for the most part, can be pretty interactive. Obviously, there are some outliers. Sometimes if you're playing, you know, Sky Striker and your opponent has Thunder Dragon Colossus on the field, that by itself can just win them the game. So yeah, obviously that is the case. That can happen. But overall, for the most part, I think it's fairly okay right now. Purely speaking, in terms of gameplay and the fairness between certain decks and your versatility and ability to overcome your opponent, generally, if you play better than your opponent, you're gonna win. I don't think anyone wants to get up from their table and realize that they lost because they just simply couldn't play the game. For the most part, generally pulse siding and stuff like that, especially in a team environment, a lot of these aspects of variance can be sort of weighed up and taken care of through side decking, through deck choices, through card choices, and teching for certain matchups. Now, talking a little bit about the negative aspects of gameplay, I think it goes without saying, the biggest elephant in the room, and it's been hovering over our heads for months now. Konami has not done anything to communicate to the player base or compromise on this aspect or talk to us at all, and that's going to be the end of match procedures. I think that throughout the entire time that the end of match procedures have been here, I have done some kind of poll or tried to get some type of feedback from you guys in the community quite often, probably like 3 times or so now, all the way up until maybe last month, I think was my last sort of query into the community about this. And at all levels of play, whether it's the ultra casuals or the completely top tier meta best players, through every level of the game, no one has given me a positive argument or positive feedback in general towards the end of match procedures. It punishes all levels of play and it promotes the worst in people. And I honestly would go so far as to say that the end of match procedures have literally legalized cheating. You are able to just play really not like slow per se, but if you take a couple of seconds here and there to fan out your graveyard or check your extra deck and then play still at a reasonable pace, use up all 3 minutes of the side decking allocated to players in a match, you can probably win a game just in time, simply because you're not allowing your opponent to get an extra turn, and you can just, you know, Kaina in the main phase and gain 100 life, and there you go, you won the game. There's lots of ways for different decks to take advantage of these time rules. Ending your current phase, it just brings out the worst in people. It brings out sharking and people like complaining, you know, my opponent didn't declare battle phase, or they did declare battle phase, and it's really sad to see just these kind of rules being in place, and it doesn't promote anything positive for the game. There is nothing positive to come away from the time rules other than the fact that events finish earlier. Now, while events finishing earlier is great, and you know, no one wants to be spending like 10 hours at a regional, at the same time, we need to maybe ask ourselves, like, to what extent is this benefit of ending games quicker positive if in the process of ending games quicker, games are being scummed by like horrible people and cheats are coming out of the woodwork to like take advantage of these rules, and overall it's just causing a miserable time for judges and players alike. Without spending too long on this, because this topic has been done to death, I just want to really emphasize the fact that it's no longer a case of just my personal opinion anymore. This is literally feedback across the entire spectrum of the Yu-Gi-Oh player base. These aren't polls that I'm putting out with people who are voting saying that, oh, the time rules are a little bit annoying, or they're a little bit inconsiderate, or they're tolerable. This is like, I am hitting numbers of 80, 85% of results in a poll saying not only are these end of match procedures like annoying per se, they're straight up bad. They are terrible. They are awful. People are using these type of adjectives to describe the end of match procedures, and Konami has put no effort in whatsoever to try and communicate their reasoning behind this, or communicate with the player base, or show any desire to compromise. Maybe even just ending the turn would be much better than ending the phase. Like the phase, like that's absolutely absurd to me how they could go ahead with that. I think that the best compromise is simply end the current turn, and then the player after that gets one more turn. So turn 0 and then turn 1. That would be enough of a fix. Konami isn't willing to give any sort of feedback or any kind of response or any kind of compromise towards this. And that's really sad to see them take purely a financial incentive into their competitive play. All this does is promote cheaper financial restrictions on Konami. They like have a lower budget or something, so they have to pay their judges less now because the events are shorter. They pay judges less. They pay stream coverage people less. They pay organizers less, etc. Like everything, it's just purely money based, right? Just so events run faster. That's it. And I think it's really, really sad for them to put money and financial profit ahead of player experience. The next point I want to talk about is a couple of the auto-win things that I've kind of touched upon already, but I think it's pretty obvious that we do have some problems in the format, and I don't really think it's so much the case of like Thunder Dragon being the be-all best deck, because I mean it's just clearly not, as we've seen from numerical results over the course of multiple events for the whole season now since its release. Clearly that deck isn't so far and beyond to the point that it's just unbeatable with its insane break my board strategy, and I've already touched upon why break my board is fine, but there are cases, and if you watch my recent Inside the Mind video with Sky Striker, you can see that that one duel that I had lasted about 20 minutes. There were about 3 turns played. It wasn't enjoyable for anyone. My opponent made a huge board, I widow anchored, I evenly matched, and I passed because I still couldn't play because the engage in my hand doesn't do anything versus Colossus. I think a lot of people might look at that and be like, well, that's a really extreme example, you know, that's really unfair, like that's a very niche thing, you know, you didn't draw any side cards. I think that example happens way more often than it should, to the point that it's probably kind of alarming. I don't think, you know, making Sky Striker be better is the answer. I don't want Sky Striker to start dominating and stuff, but I just find it bizarre how a card that is an indestructible mistake that pluses in the process of protecting itself and is so easy to it's so easy to summon. In the process of being so easy to summon, people are overlaying the excess Colossus into rank 8 monsters. Doesn't that like show you just how dumb like this Colossus card actually is? And it's not just Sky Striker, because I'm not a Sky Striker player. It's not a deck that I actively play most. In fact, I personally move towards combo decks. That's kind of the decks I've always enjoyed most. So I don't have any personal bias or agenda here. I just think that, you know, it shuts down a lot of decks unfairly. You know, we saw like Necros come back a little bit with the ban list and stuff, and well, what incentive do you ever have to play Necros at an event when you have a literal indestructible mistake on the field? Like, you know, like it's so unfair for even like rogue decks, and there's probably countless other decks that I haven't mentioned that you guys play that just hard lose to a big giant boss monster that is a mistake and can't be outed so easily. Taking so long to put up a board just to wait and pray that your 6th card is something absurd like evenly matched or raw sphere mode is like not really the type of gameplay that I want people to take away from this game. I've had a lot of personal IRL friends come in and out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Across many years now, and the one single like recurring reason that pops up for why many of my IRL friends outside of Yu-Gi-Oh! Haven't kept playing with me or came and played and then stopped playing again was, if I could summarize it and epitomize it in one single line, they told me was that they felt like they were playing a game of solitaire, watching their opponent do things just so they can activate 2 or 3 cards, get negated, lose, pass, and then die the next turn. That's really what I think summarizes exactly what was happening to many of my friends and why they just stopped playing. Because for many formats now, through as long as I can remember in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's just been some deck out there that just puts up an insane board and you just are unable to play. And like I said, break my board is fine and understandable to an extent if those negates and disruptions aren't so oppressive to the point that your opponent cannot play with every single last card in their hand. I just wanted to point out, like, these are recurring reasons that I'm seeing, and this isn't my opinion. This isn't like what I'm seeing. This is just my experience with people I know in real life. If I ask them, why don't you play Yu-Gi-Oh? And it's like, well, I don't want to sit there and just watch my opponent have fun while I'm waiting for my turn. The next point that I wanted to talk about is kind of leads on from there, and that's like the danger engine. I think that the danger engine, and we've talked about this in a previous video, I think there are benefits to it helping decks like Lunalight, Burning Abyss. A whole bunch of like legacy decks have had some kind of ability to do well now purely because of the danger engine, and that's really awesome to see, of course. At the same time, however, I think this kind of ties into maybe Azathoth, Rusty, and the Orcust combo, just how easy the dangers help facilitate that. I mean, isn't it crazy that if you just like open 2 dangers, there you go, you have a full Azathoth Rusty combo, an Orcust thing, and probably even more crazier stuff in Dark Neostorm just with 2 danger monsters. I find that really, really crazy, and that's you just playing 2 cards and not having actually played your main engine. It's a very powerful thing, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I don't think it's meta-defining, because clearly, as we can see from the results, it's definitely not meta-defining. It's very easy to side against. I don't think that an Azathoth deck actually did particularly well at the last YCS, so I mean, it goes to show that people are very well prepared for it and very well ready for it, but at the same time, I do want to emphasize the point that just because something is well prepared for and isn't the best deck, that doesn't necessitate that it isn't some kind of problematic card. I think Azathoth is very, very unfair. It's not even something my opponent can summon and I can chain Gamma to or chain Forbidden Chalice to. Like, there aren't like a lot of side cards that I can pray to draw into versus Azathoth, other than like, the remember kids, standby phase Twin Twister, summon Pankratops in main phase 1. Like, yes, that meme. I get it, right? It is outable and it is beatable, but I really, really don't enjoy having to rely on drawing cards that are unsearchable and that I just basically have to pray I draw into. I don't think anyone likes to come away from a game and say to their friends, oh yeah, game 3, my opponent went first and he Azathoth of me and I couldn't play. Like, is that enjoyable for anyone? Does anyone actually like feel accomplished when they win a duel by just Azathothing their opponent? Does anyone feel like when they lose that, when I lose, I like to come away from the duel and think to myself, what could I have done better? How could I have played this game better? Those are the kind of things I like to ask myself. I don't want to come away from losing a match and say, well, my opponent summoned a Colossus and I couldn't activate any of the blue cards in my hand. That's not enjoyable for anyone, right? I don't want to come away from a game with a handful of dangers and then my opponent summons Azathoth and I just say, well, I guess I'm going to set Jackalope, pass, and hope I don't die to the incoming 12,000 damage with Boral Sword. So that was a very surface level discussion of the state of the game. I know I didn't go too in depth with each point because honestly, each point could probably be a video on itself. But I don't want to spend too long in this video. I know I'm probably approaching absurd amounts of time already, but these are the main points and summaries that I wanted to bring. I think overall the game is fairly interactive, although there are a bunch of elements that are absolutely ridiculous, like the Azathoth issue, or the Thunder Dragon boards, or even just playing versus Salmon Grates and your opponent flips a Scythe on you or something like that, right? These are things that can happen in Yu-Gi-Oh! Today that I just feel are really, really absurd and unfair. Now, moving on to the final section, I want to talk a little bit more about the organization of the game and stuff, and there's, I think, for the most part, not really much I'd say has really changed going into 2019. I feel like it is kind of much of the same, and I feel like this area is a lot more problematic than people like first think, but there have been some good stuffs. I mean, the coverage has obviously been pretty good. Europe blowing America out of the water. I think it's not really a competition there. NA does really have to step its game up. The fact that they don't even stream every event is, annoying. I think NA has pretty much relegated their coverage of Yu-Gi-Oh! To being nationals, and that's it. We had the exception with the 3v3, and that was it. I don't really think that's enough. I think we should be getting a little bit more than that. And the coverage itself, I feel, has been pretty positive overall, despite that. I still think it's good, and we do enjoy watching it, and the quality of the commentary and stuff, and the people involved has generally been positive. The attendance has gone up, so clearly something is going on there. That's correct. Now, I could try and break down sociologically why the attendance is up despite the game being pretty awful in 2018. I don't really understand, but it could be like people who grew up with the game are now old enough to be able to afford to travel to these events. People might just have more disposable income now because of certain economic reasons as they progress through their career since leaving school, as students who have played this game for years now. There's a whole bunch of like economic explanations for why attendance might be up that isn't always necessarily tied towards gameplay. Because I think to simply say that Yu-Gi-Oh! Did well over the course of the last, 12 months or so purely because the game is fun, I think that's a very weak argument, and you need a little bit more than just the game is fun, because I would argue that the game hasn't really been that fun for certain parts of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it doesn't really explain why we've had record-breaking attendance. However, point being, I don't want to complain about that. And it's a positive thing. No one is complaining that event attendance is up. But at the same time, moving into the more negative parts, and I'm sad that I have to go over this, but it is what it is, right? While attendance might be up at tier 2 events, as far as I can see at the local and regional level, I haven't seen attendance. In fact, I feel like it's kind of fluctuated. Many of my friends that I played with have just straight up quit the game recently. I don't know what Konami is doing to really incentivize people to play at the local level or to play at the regional level. I feel like there is just absolutely no incentive at all, actually, to play at the local and regional level. Yes, they have the Worlds Race thing, which is great. The Worlds Race and the point system has been a great overhaul, and I think it's great to see that give players who are, really good at the game and really want to attend all the events and stuff, some incentive to, to go to Worlds. Like, that's probably the most prestigious event that you could go to. That's great. But to tell you the truth, your average Jimmy who gets like 5th or 4th every locals week in, week out with his cute little, fluffle deck or whatever, I don't think that's incentive enough for him to really show up to multiple regionals or travel across the continent, attending multiple YCSs and stuff, although I do want to keep this specifically to local and regional level. At the local and regional level, I feel like nothing has changed other than the world point system. And again, like I said, how many players are actually capable of going to Worlds? Like, in the grand scheme of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Player base, maybe like barely 1% of the player base can really say, yeah, I have a shot at going to Worlds, right? So I'm not really seeing what the incentive is for playing locally and regionally at a consistent basis. For, as far as I can see, at the regional level, your only real incentive to play there is to get your invite and the prestige. That's it. And prestige, I feel like, is a very weak sort of incentive to play, because there's prestige in any card game. I could go to Magic and win that event. That would be just as prestigious as winning a Yu-Gi-Oh! Region, probably more prestigious. I don't know. But you see my point. Like, there's nothing uniquely incentivized in Yu-Gi-Oh! For you to consistently play at locals and regionals. As far as I'm aware, a lot of top players don't even attend locals. They literally just don't go. They get their invite at YCSs by topping, for God's sake. So I don't really see what has been put in place to really incentivize local and regional attendance. Deckbox and Mat, I'm really sorry, Konami. It's been years and years and years. Deckbox and Mat is not good enough. It really is just not good enough to get your people and get your customers and your player base attending these events. While the tier 2 events and stuff are up in attendance, pretty sure we can agree it's not because the prize support for tier 2 events is particularly great in itself. I'm pretty sure Bowden at this point is using a PlayStation 4 as his wallpaper by now. We can't, even at the top end for the competitive players at tier 2 levels, there really isn't much incentive to play at a YCS other than just for the glory itself of topping or winning a YCS. And I think the Worlds Race helped that a lot, but when we go back to the local and regional level, I don't believe that's good enough. There's a whole bunch of other minor points that I don't want to spend too much upon. There's very few opportunities for content creators to really do much coverage for the game outside of, what we do personally, like in terms of Konami support and stuff. Very little in way of helping us do coverage. There have been some community days and stuff, which is a great step forward. And there's even been financial help in getting to those community days. And that's really awesome. That's really great to see, and I hope they keep that up. So there's some positive steps in the right direction. I just hope we see more and more of this going forward. So that's really awesome to see. And the final point that I want to talk about is the accessibility into the metagame itself. I think that there was some kind of turn at some point by Konami where the deck cores themselves aren't really that expensive anymore. I think like Thunder Dragon is obviously a big exception to that, but we have like Salomon Grade, very, very cheap deck core. Sky Striker, I would argue, isn't really that bad to pay for it, despite the secret engages and widow anchors. It's not like the most expensive thing ever to invest in for a deck that has been around for a year. However, I've noticed that the staples are really the problem cards now. I don't know what it is or why, but I don't think staple cards should be printed in such short printed high rarities. Phantasme, Impermanence, Ash Blossom on release, like these extremely, extremely good, powerful cards at this rarity, it's really not accessible for your average player. It's far too expensive. A playset of Impermanence and Phantasme, that's just not worth it for your average player. Like, your average player is just not going to pay for that. I would very much like to say, I think there's a lot of solutions that they can put forward to fixing the sort of rarity issue and the accessibility to staples and stuff. And to tell you the truth, I think it just has to be a complete overhaul of the system itself. I think, like, you know, there's a few suggestions here. I'm not saying these are the answers. I'm just spitballing some suggestions here. You know, what they could do is they could put, like, instead of 2 secret rares in a box, they could let you pull like 8 secret rares in a box, but they would reserve list that set. So for example, you know, you would get like a set of Savage Strike. There's like 8 secrets in a box, but you know, Konami would say these cards will never be reprinted again. So that way people have an incentive to build up a collection. People have an incentive to pay early and to buy product early and quickly, because they know that those cards will always retain some value. It's like that in Magic. It's like that in other card games, I believe, as well. People have an incentive to build up a collection and to build up a pool of cards. I personally used to have a collection of cards of just staple cards. I had, like, you know, a set of like chalices or sanctums and veilers and maxis and stuff like that that I would keep in my box, because I know that one day those cards might be relevant in a certain format. I just don't think that's really, like, you know, just it's not incentivized with this current system. You know, they could have multiple rarities like they do in the OCG, where, you know, we could have like super phantasmes, but there's also the option to get secrets if you want or something like that, right? Like, these staples are far too expensive, and I think there's plenty of ways for them to change the system for the way these cards are distributed without upsetting anyone. Or conversely, maybe if they're going to keep the secrets at this ratio of roughly 2 per box, why not just reduce the number of secrets? It feels really, really awful to come away from buying a box and realizing, oh, I pulled the wrong secret rare. Because there's a lot of cards that are secret rares which are just terrible. Like, there are some secret rares you pull, you look at and you sigh, because you know that it's worth nothing. It's just some crappy little, like, gimmick anime card that nobody really wants and isn't even that popular to begin with in terms of sentimental value. It feels really awful. I really do think, like, either multiple rarities or short printing or a reserve list, or simply just upping the rate at which they print these cards, or reducing the number of secret rare total that we get in a given card pool is the best way to go. But I'm sure there's lots of ways to fix this. But accessibility right now, I think, is okay. It's not the worst thing ever. But it is a real issue when you're trying to obtain these secret rares. A lot of people will say, you know, Salamangreat is a great meta deck because it's so accessible to a lot of the player base. And while that is true, you need to understand that if you're going to play at the highest competitive level, you are going to need access to some very, very expensive cards in order to do well. You're probably going to be at a bit of a disadvantage if you don't play Phantasme, or if you don't play Impermanence in your deck list somewhere in 2019. And I would like to see these cards fixed somehow in terms of this whole system of just the box system that they currently have, because I really don't think it's good enough at the moment. Well, that's been a long one. Thank you so much for listening to my analysis on the state of the game currently. Like I said, I did want to do a very in-depth, serious sort of take on this, and I hope that you enjoyed this. I tried to be as unbiased as possible, but let me know down in the description if you think there's any points that I've missed. If you wanted to contribute to any parts of the discussion, please feel free. I promise I will be reading and responding to almost all of them. So do go ahead and let me know what you think down below. If you do enjoy this type of video, let me know as well, and maybe I'll do more in the future. Comment, like, and subscribe as always. Thank you for watching, and until next time, farewell. Keep spending most our life.